This is the first lecture on postmodernism, which is the name given to the period of literary criticism that is now in full bloom. So both modernism, of course, and postmodernism are placeholder names. They actually mean what's happening now, as in modernism, and what's happening after now. So, of course, these are rather silly names, which are no doubt going to be replaced. But as the name implies, it is the period that comes after the modern period. Post means after. So postmodernism is after modern. But periods are not easily separated into by dates and centuries. There is no single definition of, remember this, there is no single definition of postmodernism. I cannot give it to you. If you look it up in a dictionary, you will get something extremely ambiguous. What does that mean? Ambiguous. Do you know that word? In Icelandic, it would probably translate as tvíræðni. It is the ability of a word or a sentence or anything to mean different things. Vague is just, what does that translate into in Icelandic? What is vague? If something is very vague, what is it?
Vague?
Óljóst.
Yeah.
Unclear. So that is something that you need to get used to about postmodernism. It can mean different things, and it's very unclear what it is. But what we know about it is that it is both a direct continuation. What does this mean? Direct continuation. Beint framhald. Yes, good. It's a direct continuation of modernism and a reaction against it. What does this mean? Reaction. Yes. It's like something that pushes against it. So it's something that continues directly from it and rebels against it, in a sense. And if this sounds like a weird contradiction to you, contradiction, do you know that word? Contradiction, to contradict somebody. A threesome. If it sounds like a contradiction to you, you're on the right track. So don't think of your study on postmodernism that it is something that you need to just nail down and understand. Rather, try to explore it. What does that mean? To explore something? Yes. Al kann eitthvað, to investigate it. Think of it as a way to analyze and grasp the modern world. Analyze, what is that? Það er greina. Or, use this metaphor. It's a pair of glasses to view it through. It's a pair of glasses to view the modern world and society. It's a way of seeing things. Now, what postmodernism and modernism have in common is at the heart of both is, remember this, break with tradition. What does that mean? Að brjótast gegn hefðunum. Byltingar gegn hefðunum. To grasp this properly, we need to look at where this comes from. This didn't just come out of nowhere. And to do that, we're going to look at the ideas of a German philosopher called Friedrich Nietzsche. Have you heard about him? He's a very, very famous philosopher, Nietzsche. One of his most famous declarations was, God is dead. That's a pretty big declaration, isn't it? Declaration means tilkynning or something like that. a statement. He said just directly, God is dead. But by that he did not mean literally. What does this word mean? Bókstaflega. He wasn't talking about it literally. He was talking about rather that the idea of God was dead. Hugmyndin að Guði væri dauð. Along with Christian morality and metaphysics. Christian morality, what would that mean? Kristin siðferðisviðmið og slíkt. He was saying that the idea was dead. Now, the idea of God had and still hasn't disappeared. Would you say so? Would you say that the idea of God plays any role in your lives? Or is he just dead? What do you say? In society, does God play any role? The idea of a God? Yes, of course it does. It's a pretty big idea still. So, the idea of God had and still hasn't disappeared. But it has certainly changed a lot from the all-powerful deity of the Middle Ages, and is nowhere near as, and this is a good word, omnipresent. What does that mean? Omni, break it down. What does omni mean? Do you know that? It's also in words like omnipotent. Omni, yes, it means everywhere.
At the same time.
Yes. And present means just to be there, nærvera. So even though it's a powerful idea, it isn't absolutely everywhere as it used to be. There are no longer kings and governments, at least in the Western world, who derive their power from the Almighty, and morality is no longer based solely on religious principles. You know, our government is not in place because God wanted it to, is it? We don't think of it that way. But in the Middle Ages, you did what the king said because that was what God wanted. You know, that was how society was structured. We no longer structure a society on the idea of God. And morality used to be, you don't do that because, you know, God says no. But no, some people still do it that way, but others pretty much ignore God and still live what they would certainly call a moral life, don't they? So God is not, the idea of God is not as powerful as it was. Would you agree with me on this? Now, Nietzsche, he was concerned about this, not because he was such a devout Christian or anything, but because he was worried that this might lead to something that is called nihilism. Have you ever heard of this term?
No.
Nihilism. Okay. Nihilism is the radical repudiation of value, meaning, and desirability. So what does this word mean? To understand this sentence, you need to understand it. It means just making it not mean anything. Making it less. So values in Icelandic would be gildi, meaning is merking, and desirability is, what's a good word for that in Icelandic? Yeah, þrár. In short, it's a state of utter meaninglessness, where nothing means anything. That's what nihilism is. Where I could just go and like walk in and I just don't care and I just kill a bunch of people and I just don't care about it and I walk out. Or I could go and you know, do something wonderful and it just doesn't matter. I don't care. It's the state of not caring about anything. and nothing meaning anything. Do you have a grasp on this idea? The idea of God was not the only old idea that was dying. The whole stability, what does stability mean? Stöðugleiki. The whole stability of the world as humanity understood it and itself had been shaking under the pressure of new ideas of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and modernism. You at least heard about this one. You should have heard about something about this one if you ever taken any history or philosophy. These two, in arts as well. These were new ideas that came and replaced the all-consuming idea of God in the Middle Ages. And the stability of the world was kind of rocking under this. It was, jafnvægi. You might say the world wasn't balanced. Samfélagið var ekki í jafnvægi út af þessu, út af nýjum hugmyndum sem koma í stað þeirra gömlu. The process is described well in a poem that might be familiar to you by William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? It's from America, yeah. It's used in American Gods at one point. Or it's referenced. Yeats, the guy who wrote this, oops. Can't I? Oh. Yeats imagined history like it was turning in some circles, like a bird that flies in circles around its trainer. So we have these cycles of time. The Renaissance period, the Enlightenment period, and modernity, for example. Whatever centers we base our world, our views, our meaning of right and wrong, etc., loosen a bit until they unravel completely. We always have some sort of a center, In the Middle Ages, it was God. God, the idea of God was the center. Everything revolved around it. Do you understand? Everything revolved around this one powerful idea that there was a God. And that we had, that we knew what this God was. But then the center, if the center is, if the idea of God is dead, the center is gone, what does everything turn around? It just looses. And mere anarchy. Do you know what anarchy means? Yeah, but what does it mean? Stjórnleysi, where nothing is controlled. That's anarchy. If society can't base itself on anything, then everything goes, doesn't it? Let's look at the Enlightenment and its ideals for an example. Following the laws of church authority, when the idea of God started to be less powerful, it was replaced with another central idea of the Enlightenment. And that central idea was reason. What does this mean?
Reason.
That's one, it can mean ástæða, but in this context it means something else. Reason. Skynsemi. Hvað segirðu? Skynsemi. That was the central idea, that we, skynsemi and science, that scientific inquiry, that was the central ideal of the Enlightenment. Reason will lead to the truth. Truth is found through science, rather than opinion or faith, and through scientific inquiry, all the mysteries of the universe can be solved, and the solutions to all the problems people face will be revealed. That was the new idea that replaced the old idea, that we can make society better through science, basically. Do you understand? Do you agree? Oh? Talk about that a bit. How has this ideal of the Enlightenment turned out in the past century? If you just look 100 years back, what has science done for us? Is it all good or what?
Good and bad.
It's good and bad, isn't it? What is this that I'm here?
The nuclear bomb?
That's a nuclear bomb, which came from where? It came from science, of course. So science, it's great, but it's, well, it has consequences. Moral consequences, which it itself has sort of a difficulty in answering. And, people may ask, does really science answer questions about right and wrong any better than religion did? I don't know. What do you think? You live in a very scientific world now. At least you live in a world that has received a lot of gifts from science. But in truth, do you know a lot about science? Do you know more about it than like a medieval monk would do? I hope so. Or are you just more used to it? Yeah. How is it possible that you are receiving images and information through the internet? Where does it come from? Do you have any idea?
Google.
From Google. Yes. And if you have a moral choice, of something being right or wrong, do you just Google it and get a good answer? Like, is it?
I'd rather ask someone else instead of going to Google.
You'd rather ask a person, just like a medieval person would do. So things haven't changed all that much, perhaps. Or you would ask another person through Google, perhaps. Now, this loss of a center, this loss of meaning is why both modernism and postmodernism revolve around a rebellion against tradition. If you want to understand what's happening, you need to understand this. Tradition is part of the old center which society revolved around, and it is therefore meaningless in today's society. The Bible, strict obedience to the Bible only makes sense to people who obey it strictly. There was a... Yes. There was I saw an interview with an American fundamentalist some time ago, and he said, if the Bible tells me that 2 + 2 = 5, well then that's that. Then 2 + 2 = 5. Do you understand him? Do you understand his reasoning? I don't. I can't put myself in his shoes. I really don't. I really can't. But can you? Can you decide that 2 + 2 = 5 because God said so?
Because we're meant to think that in math, they
Yeah.
say 2 + 2 = 4, and we're not used to thinking that the Bible is right.
Yeah.
100%.
But in the medieval ages, or in certain circles still today, that is just how it is. If God says 2 plus 2 is 5, then that's that.
Respect for God.
Yeah. But it doesn't make any sense, does it? So they have a center. They have a very powerful center. We don't have that center. We have another center. So the aim, if the old centers, old traditions are all outdated, you might say, then the aim is to replace this center with something new, and that is what it's about. Creating new centers, new central ideas. And the crucial difference between modernism and postmodernism, and if you haven't been listening at all this time, listen now to understand this. The difference between modernism and postmodernism is that while the first tries to establish new centers, the latter, postmodernism, simply gets rid of the whole idea of these centers. Modernism is trying to create new meaning which will just recreate society as a whole. Postmodernism, just screw it. Okay. This is why postmodernism and modernism share many of the characteristics in literature and other art forms. This is why they are so similar. They're both they have a lot in common, don't they? They have the same ideological basis. The difference is more in spirit. What does that mean? Spirit. In spirit. Já, hann huglægur. Hann tilfinningalegur jafnvel. It is the spirit, atmosphere, and of course more modern contemporary subject matter. Modernism is more depressing. What does that mean, to be more depressing? Yeah. Modernism is more depressing and nostalgic. Nostalgic, what does this mean? Yeah, when you love something so much, like I just.
Like it brings back memories.
Huh? It brings back memories. Something that brings back memories, and that's why it's good. When you like your mom's apple pie, it's better because you remember how it was when you were a kid. That's nostalgia for you. And that was modernism. It was so wonderful when the world was clear. We need to make it clear again, like it was 100 years or 200 years ago when the idea of God just ruled everything. Postmodernism, however, is more ironic and dark-humored. What does this mean? Ironic. Kaldhæðnislegur. Dark-humored. What does that mean? Svartur humor. Because it revels in the freedom of a world in chaos. Doesn't it? So, shared characteristics. These should be familiar. There is a new emphasis on impressionism and subjectivity, that is on how we see rather than just what we see. So we want to, in fact, see more than just what is apparent, you might say. A movement in novels away from the apparent objectivity provided by such features as fixed narrative points of view and clear-cut moral positions.
Why is a clear-cut moral position?
That's like a black and white morality. That's like in Cinderella, you know who's the bad guy, and he's just bad. He's just black. And you know who's the good guy, and that is just white. There are no gray areas. But in modernism, we move away from that.
So you don't see who's the bad guy at first.
No, you need to make a moral judgment about that. So or even there is a lot of gray area, like in the story, the new Disney story, Maleficent, which is about the evil fairy in Cinderella. And suddenly she has a backstory, and we understand her motives.
No, it was Sleeping Beauty.
Hmm.
It was in Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, in Sleeping Beauty, I mean. So we all of a sudden have this huge gray area.
And they changed the story so they did.
Yeah, that is extremely postmodern. That's a postmodern thinking. 3, a blurring of the distinction between genres. Novels become more poetical and poems more documentary and prose-like. Did you see any of this in Moulin Rouge? For example, a new emphasis on impressionism. How do we, for example, what are the surroundings in the opening act and in the end act when what's her name? Satine is dead. And the main character's name, I've completely forgotten it now. Christopher, yeah. When she's dead, what are his surroundings like? What is the weather like when he's sad? It's dark and rainy. But when he's happy, what is the surroundings then? What is the weather like? And sunny and bright. How do we see these things? How does it affect us? We don't just see it. It must be possible to be joyous and glad and it still be raining, doesn't it? The weather doesn't follow our mood, except in movies, doesn't it? And the narrative point of view, it's all over the place in Moulin Rouge. And do we have clear-cut moral positions? For example, the Satine's boss, what's his name? Yeah, Siegler. Is he a bad guy or a good guy?
It's not really clear.
It's not really clear.
Because sometimes he can actually be bad, but then he's actually really nice.
Yeah, and we understand his motives. He's trying to protect her and his business and everybody who relies on it. So it's not really clear if he's the bad guy or the good guy, is he? So there is not a clear-cut moral, guys. There's not a clear-cut moral position. A blurring of the distinction between genres. Novels become more poetical and poems more documentary and prose-like. What sort of a movie is this? We've gone through this before. How would you define, the type? No, if you had to list it under what sort of a movie it is, how would you list it?
Romantic musical.
So it's a romantic and it's a musical, and it's also a play, you might say. Fragmentation in all sorts of forms is very common, thus the storyline can be fragmented, start at the middle or even the end, and then jump back and forth, for example. Was that in Moulin Rouge?
Yeah, it started in the end.
It started in the end. A tendency, also, where did it get all its music from? Where was all the music from?
I know the first one was a sound from some music.
Yeah? And all that music is from somewhere else. It's famous music from somewhere else. Like a Virgin with Madonna and Roxanne. These are all very, very famous songs from the 80s and the 90s. But when is the story taking place? It's taking place in the early 19th century. And
Is it in France or something? I don't know. Where was the movie? Like, was it in France or England?
it was in France. It was in Paris. It was like a bohemian atmosphere, I think, yeah, of that time. It's the revolutionary atmosphere in Paris at that time. Number 5, there's a tendency towards reflexivity, so that poems and novels raise issues concerning their own nature, status, and role. This is a pretty difficult characteristic to nail down, but it's very obvious in Moulin Rouge. What are they doing, within the movie? What are they creating? They are creating a play, a musical of their own, which reflects what is happening in their. And yet we are watching it on a movie screen. So it's art meeting art talking about itself in a way there. Also, for example, you might consider the symbolism. What does Christopher, wasn't that his name? I forgot. What does he sell so that he can give Satine money in the end. He wants to pay her for her attention and her love because he's hurt. So he sells something of his.
It was a song or something.
His typewriter, wasn't it? His instrument for his art. He sells it. There's all sorts of symbolism within that. He's selling his art. And that's what artists do. So then you have to ask, what is art? And how does it, is it truly independent for the artist, or is he driven by something else, something that the consumer is? All sorts of questions. It is raising issues concerning their own nature, status, and role. So what you are supposed to do is explain and analyze in at least 200 words what is postmodern about the movie Moulin Rouge. Think of this as a warm-up for your presentation assignment. Use examples from the movie to support your case where appropriate. It's very important in this sort of assignment not assume that I haven't seen the movie and know nothing about it. Be clear. Any questions?